Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 14 of the Catholics Against Militarism podcast. My name is Ellen, and I am here today with Judy Coode. And Judy is the project coordinator for the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. And she has helped to organize 2 conferences with the Vatican on Just Peace and Nonviolence. So welcome, Judy.
Thank you, Ellen, very much.
Great. So Judy, I was hoping you could tell us just a little bit about your personal background before we start talking about the nonviolence conferences that you've organized. What's your background?
Sure. I was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee, a big Catholic family there. I attended college in New Orleans, at Loyola, taught by Jesuits. I did a volunteer year with Jesuit Volunteer Corps in Anchorage, and then I moved to Washington, D.C. to do a volunteer year with Sojourners magazine. That's what got me to Sojourners. And once I moved here to Washington, I made friends with some folks, young people who were involved with Pax Christi USA at the time. In the 90s, early 90s, there was a pretty active Pax Christi USA young adult forum. And I was welcomed into that group and became very active with Pax Christi. Subsequently, I was employed by the Maryknoll missioners for 20 years. I worked here in the Washington office, the Maryknoll Office for Global Concerns, which does advocacy on behalf of the Maryknoll missioners. And so I was there for 20 years. And then a few years ago, I started working with Pax Christi International, and that's when I started in 2016. I started with Pax Christi International with the first Nonviolence and Just Peace conference, which was held in April 2016. And I've just stayed on with Pax Christi International in this role, helping with the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative since then.
Awesome. Wow, what an exciting life. Thank you for sharing that. So for those of people who are listening, I thought we could start by providing kind of a broad overview of what's been going on in the last, during Pope Francis' pontificate. I know that in 2016, he announced the Jubilee Year of Mercy. And then it was the following January, on January 1st, 2017, which was World Peace Day, when he published his encyclical on nonviolence called Nonviolence, A Style of Politics for Peace. And I guess go ahead. Did you want to jump in?
Well, I just wanted to say the World Day of Peace message is not an encyclical. So it's just a World Day of Peace message. It is a really nice statement, but they're not considered encyclicals.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so when you guys had your first conference in April of 2016, that was before he published that message.
Yes.
About nonviolence. Did that message have something to do with the conference that you put together in 2016?
We feel, yes, it did. We were very honored in 2016. Cardinal Peter Turkson attended, and at the time, Cardinal Turkson was the secretary of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, which is the department within the Vatican that managed all of the church's work on war and peace and economic justice and ecological justice and all the important things like that. It has now been folded into a new department, which is called the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. And he's I think his title is prefect now of the Dicastery. Cardinal Turkson was with us in 2016 at that first Nonviolence and Just Peace conference. And it was at the end of that conference, he spoke with several of the organizers and said, it would be really helpful if maybe you could put down some of the ideas about nonviolence and share them with us, and we can provide them to the Holy Father so that he can make a decision and write his World Day of Peace message, perhaps from some of your suggestions. So that is what happened. I mean, it wasn't the World Day of Peace message is written by the Holy Father. He chooses the theme and writes it. But we do feel that 2017 message, Nonviolence, A Style of Politics for Peace, did in fact stem in part from our Nonviolence and Just Peace gathering in April of 2016. Yes.
Wow. I mean, I was so excited to see that letter when it came out. I loved that letter. And it was such a perfect thing to start a new year on the World Peace Day. So I will link to that for anyone who's watching on YouTube. But could you tell us a little bit about what that 2016 conference was about? Because I know you had one in 2016 and then you had another one this year.
Yes.
So what was the 2116 all about? What were you all trying to accomplish?
Well, it had been a conversation that had been going on for a while, with some folks within Pax Christi and some other Catholic peace activists, that in fact, nonviolence as a strategy, as a way of life, needed particular attention, that it was something that maybe the church could talk about more overtly and directly. And so some folks had made up their minds that it would be a really good idea to have a formal conversation with the Vatican about this topic. And so they lobbied for a while, tried to get in touch with folks such as Cardinal Turkson and others within the Vatican to see, could there be a meeting with some theologians and peace practitioners and Vatican officials just to start this conversation. So it took a while, and ultimately the end of 2015, like in December, I think, of 2015, Cardinal Turkson sent a message to some of these folks who had been contacting him and said, okay, we can have a meeting. It'll be in April, beginning of April. These are the dates that we're available. So go ahead and organize your meeting. And that's how I got involved, starting in January of 2016. And it was decided, about 80 people were invited to Rome. We found a venue and started sending out some invitations. It was a combination of some theologians who have been working on this topic and some peace practitioners, local folks who have had direct experience of conflict. And so we gathered together for 2.5 days in Rome just to talk, just to open up the conversation. And there were 4 plenary sessions that focused on the biblical basis of nonviolence, Jesus's words of nonviolence, the church's experience of promoting nonviolence. I'm not getting the exact. I have to look up what the exact title of these sessions. I want to point out that the way that these 4 plenary sessions were designed, it was a unique, it was a different setup for conferences that many people had attended. It was decided that these plenary sessions, rather than having one speaker who would address a crowd, they designed them as fishbowls. So, which meant that at the front of the room, there was a semicircle of chairs, 5 or 6 chairs. 5 or 6 individuals were specifically invited to begin a conversation. And there was one person designated as sort of the facilitator of this conversation. But these 5 or 6 people would begin the conversation, talk amongst themselves, give their own statements, talk amongst themselves. And then they would choose to remove themselves from that semicircle, and anyone in the audience could step forward and take a seat and share their own experience or their viewpoint for the whole gathering. And of course, the intention was that this is an example of nonviolence in action. This is an egalitarian and equal. Everyone in the room was on equal standing, and everyone had the chance to be heard. So we had these 4 plenary sessions. After each plenary session, we had small groups that had been organized by language. We had folks who spoke Spanish, French, Italian, and English. They broke into small groups, and they continued and deepened their conversation amongst each other. and then came back to another plenary session. And at the end of our 2.5 days together, we had a lot of really good notes. Notes had been taken during the plenary sessions and also during the small language groups. The notes taken from those sessions were compiled, and a final statement was developed. The last couple of hours of our time together, we had a statement that was projected onto the wall of the main gathering room, and everyone in the room, we went through line by line of this statement and got to a point where pretty much everyone could affirm it. A couple of people felt that they weren't in a space to affirm it, and that became the appeal to the Catholic Church to return to the centrality of gospel nonviolence. So
Okay, great.
I don't know if you have the link to that, or I can send you the link for that. And we welcome that anyone can endorse it if they would like.
Oh, terrific. Yeah, we'll definitely link to that. Okay, so it was really just kind of to get a conversation going. It lasted
Right.
2.5 days, and the outcome was really the appeal.
That's right.
Okay. One thing that I thought was just so neat when I was reading about this is that it wasn't just a bunch of academics and theologians that were sitting around
No.
talking about it. Could you give us a few examples of people who were there who spoke from a firsthand experience with conflict and dealing with conflict using nonviolent means?
Yes, we were really lucky to have a number of people who had direct experience. Father Francisco Deru is a Jesuit priest from Colombia, and he actually, at the moment, he has been tapped to, I think he's now the head of the Truth and Reconciliation panel in Colombia today. I don't know the exact title, but he spoke as as a Jesuit priest and as a Colombian. His role, he actually had played a pretty key role in the peace negotiations in Colombia, to have the family members of the victims of terrorism participate in the negotiations. I think that they were held in Cuba. That was one thing he did directly. He spoke very movingly about his personal experiences. We had a Dominican sister, Sister Nazik from Iraq. She was a young woman. She had direct experience as in being an internally displaced person, as her community had to be moved between cities as the war crept up on them. She spoke very, very clearly about the need to talk with ISIS, for instance. She said, we have to talk to them because they're our neighbors. We can't not talk to them. They live right next door to us. Of course, we're going to talk to them. And it was really wonderful to have her presence with us.
And
We had
what would she, I'm sure this came up. I mean, what would she say when people say, oh, there are some people that you simply can't talk to because
she said, no, that's not true. No, we can talk to them. Of course we talk to them. She said that
wow.
repeatedly. Yeah. You
So
talk to
she had done it, or she had witnessed it.
She had
People,
witnessed it. I mean, and she just felt it was she had to pack up her things, and they had to she and the members of her community, they had to move, and she had experienced that personally, and she still said, you have to talk to them, you have to talk to people, you have to talk to them.
wow. Yeah, that's pretty incredible. I mean, I thought that was really neat, that you had people who had experience kind of on the front lines, but instead of on the front lines of war, on the front lines of nonviolence. And people tend to think, though, oh, nonviolence can only work when things are already peaceful. But it can't work when it gets to a certain point. And it sounded to me like some of these people, I mean, I wish that you'd like recorded it. Did you record it, the
Yeah,
sessions?
I'm not sure what yeah, I don't know if her language is on there. Yes, if you visit the website that we have, which is nonviolencejustpeace.net, on the left-hand menu, if you scroll down, it's sort of far down the menu. There is, it's like the the first part of the menu, you can see videos from the 2016 Nonviolence and Just Peace conference.
Oh, cool. So you can actually hear
So
people telling their
yeah,
stories, and
yeah.
that's great. I think that's something that's really missing in education today. Catholic education and all education is kind of, people think of nonviolence, they think of MLK and Gandhi, and a couple times when maybe it worked, but they think overall it doesn't work. But that's mostly because we don't get an education, and times that it has worked and ways that it is effective. So that's neat. I'll definitely link to that because I'd love to listen to that. Of course, I don't know if they'll be speaking in English at this conference. Was everybody speaking English?
Most of it is in English, and the parts that are not in English, we should have transcripts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really neat. Okay, so you had this appeal, and then I understand, was it the same people that met again this year in 2019?
It wasn't exactly the same group. It was a handful of people were the same. This year, let me just back up and say that after the 2016 conference, we very deliberately wanted to stay in touch with what was becoming the dicastery for promoting integral human development. They have been open to having conversations with us. They have a huge agenda. This staff. It's basically, all the justice issues of the world are on their plates.
And I'm sorry, just to clarify, this dicastery, these are like Catholic words that I don't know. What is
Nobody's
it?
ever heard this word before. Listen, join the club. No, not one person has ever heard the word dicastery before.
I don't even know what that is. It's just, is it
I
like
know. No, we
the
don't know. I
Vatican? Like,
guess it just means like department. Yeah.
oh, okay.
Yeah,
And it's
really
of the
funny.
Vatican, of the Catholic Church.
Yes. No,
Got it.
you are not alone. I never heard that word. No one I know has ever heard that word before.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot of strange Catholic words people throw around, and I'm like, I have no idea what that means.
yeah.
Okay, but go ahead.
So um so we have been able to have an ongoing conversation with them, and they did agree to have another gathering. We thought it would be important to continue to deepen the conversation, um, sort of get a read on where we are 3 years later. So yes, we had another gathering in April of 2019. We had about 75 people who attended. The dicastery the 2016 meeting, most of the invitees came from our list, like from like a Pax Christi or the other organizations that were involved in organizing, and less from the Vatican. So this meeting, the invitee list was sort of half and half. The dicastery invited about half the people who attended, and it was a little more hierarchical. We had a few more bishops who attended, and we had a few people who had been with us in 2016. We still wanted to emphasize people who have direct experience of conflict and bringing nonviolent tactics to areas of conflict, and some theologians. One person who was invited by the Vatican invited her, a woman named Francoise Keller, and she's French, and she's a leader in nonviolent communication. She's written a lot about that, and it was good to have her there. And one person who was at both meetings in 2016 and 2019 is a woman from Kenya named Kanini Kimau, Kimau, and she is a peace practitioner. She lives out in the bush in Kenya and does a lot of nonviolent strategies with some of the pastoralist communities in Kenya. So yeah, it was a mix, a handful of people who attended both, and then some new folks.
Okay, and it was the same. Now that the appeal had been written, was there a new goal for the 2019 conference?
We had not really set a goal. I think we we did end up with a statement, a new statement. It's It's sort of different. It's not necessarily open to signatures. We weren't collecting signatures on this one, but we certainly hope it can be spread and shared widely. The intention for this April 2019 conversation was simply just to have it, just to keep the door open, keep the conversation going.
Got it. And then do you think that Pope Francis probably eventually read the statement from that one as well?
We assume he did. We have not gotten confirmation one way or the other, but we think he does know about us. He knows. We've not met him. I mean, as a group, we know he knows that we exist. He did
Okay.
write. He wrote a note to us in 2016. He wrote a very kind, welcoming message and reminded us of the importance of the work for nonviolence, and he appreciated that we were making this effort. So
I got it. So is the goal then to overthrow or jettison, these hundreds of years of Catholic tradition with the just war doctrine? I mean, are you guys advocating that that doctrine be changed, modified, clarified, or completely like tossed in the garbage? Can you clarify what your stance is on the just war theory as a group, I guess, if there is one stance, or maybe different people feel differently about it?
I think it's safe to say that different people feel differently about it. Um, and from my perspective, I'd say that ideally, what we would like to see um, is more of an emphasis on new ways of thinking, on a new moral framework, on a just peace way of identifying ways to respond to conflict and ways to live. And I'm not. I don't know what the church would do with the just war theory, except possibly just forget about it, and they'll put it in a closet on a shelf and close the door and ignore it. What we would like to see the church do is use its extensive resources, its human resources, financial resources, diplomatic resources, to embracing and promoting and teaching nonviolence in every way. That's our goal.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna throw, oh, I would have another question for you. So a lot of people are really on the fence right now about Pope Francis and really uncomfortable with a lot of the things that he's doing. I listen to a lot of like more traditional and conservative Catholic podcasts, and everybody's like up in arms over the Amazon Synod, and I think that sometimes he says things that are very confusing, and it's a little bit of a problem. But what would you say to somebody who thinks, oh, this is just another like kooky Pope Francis thing? This is just another thing that this Pope is doing with nonviolence that fits in with all this other stuff that people don't agree with. I guess what I'm saying is, it seems to me like this isn't just from Pope Francis. Like, this has been kind of like decades in the making, and like I think,
Absolutely.
can you speak to that a little bit? Like, this isn't just coming from Pope Francis.
No. So, Ellen, I'll share with you at least one link. I know that, for instance, I mean, promoting nonviolence and acknowledging that war is a failure is this has been going on for decades within the church. It's been a long time coming, and I think most recently it certainly has come out with Gaudium in Spes in the early 60s, and the encyclicals from John the 23rd and other the teachings from the U.S. bishops. I mean, they've said repeatedly that war is a failure. I mean, John Paul II made that very clear. they have critiqued war. Benedict has critiqued war and said it's a failure. This is not a new thing. I mean, the only thing that Pope Francis is doing is he's repeating what they're saying. He's just repeating it. He's not saying anything new. This is not new from Francis.
Yeah, and I'll link to Nonviolence: A Style of Politics for Peace, but he quotes a lot from Benedict XVI in that message.
Right.
Direct quotes on nonviolence. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to make the point, just in case anyone just wants to dismiss it outright because it's associated with Pope Francis. I do think it's an important movement, and I'm really happy that you guys are undertaking this. I know you've had your critics though. Would you mind if I read a quote to you from First Things magazine?
Go ahead.
I think that it really represents the way that a lot of people feel when they hear about this. I think first of all, there was an article written called "The Pacifist Temptation." So the word temptation tells you everything you need to know right there. Temptation is a bad thing, right? So the idea that, number one, what you guys are advocating is pacifism, which is not a good word, and you have an explanation for that on your website, but then calling it a temptation. So here's the quote. So he was writing about the initial conference in 2016 in First Things. I think it was William Doino Jr. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he wrote an article called "The Pacifist Temptation," and it was really, really critical of this effort, these conferences that you put together. So he said, if pacifism had prevailed among civilized leaders, especially in the modern age, there would be no international, quote, peace conferences to speak of, for totalitarianism would have long since conquered the world. And every person of faith or conscience would be either dead or in a concentration camp. What would you say to that kind of reaction to the conference? That if you guys win, every person of faith or conscience will ultimately end up dead or in a concentration camp because we will no longer be able to use force. Catholics and Christians will no longer be able to use force. I think this is a legitimate, I think a lot of people feel this kind of threat when they hear of people questioning the just war theory. What would you say to that? Do you have any kind of response?
I think it's just a lack of creative thinking. I think that there have been episodes that we know that nonviolence has worked in situations like in Denmark during World War II. That was a nonviolent resistance to the Nazis, and they succeeded. We have quoted a lot from Maria Stephan and Erica Chenoweth, who are two social scientists who have done extensive research about the effectiveness of nonviolent resistance, and that it is significantly more successful. Nonviolent resistance has been more successful than violent resistance, and we have links to that on our web pages. I just I don't know. I just think it's I think it's sort of sad to be, it's just a lack of creative thinking in when we keep a war-making option in our back pocket, we're always just going to default to it, and we just need more creative thinking, and So
no, thank you for that. I think that was a good answer, and I think too, if more people knew about the success of nonviolent movements and how powerful they can be, then this kind of reaction would not go away, but it would become less common, because there would be an education not just in, well, here's all the wars that we've fought, and our side was always the good guy and we always did the right thing and we won, and it's I think we learn a lot about war so that we think that that's the only way that these things can be accomplished, but we just don't learn in school about these other these movements and these other instances in history. Another thing that he wrote is It is one thing to honor individual Christians who cannot in good conscience take up arms and who are willing to die for their beliefs. It is another to encourage movements that call on democratic societies to conform to pacifist demands in the face of tyrants and mass murderers, and are blind to the incalculable suffering pacifist policies would lead to. Um, so are you guys calling on entire democratic societies to abandon weapons and turn away from war? I guess what I'm saying is it seems to me that sometimes people conflate like Catholic teaching with like secular politics. Like,
Right. And to be clear, this project, the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, this is directed at the Catholic Church. What we're asking for is the Catholic Church, with its power, its authority, its resources, to embrace and endorse and teach nonviolence in its ways. And our hope is that with if the Catholic Church does shift more of its teaching and its resources to embracing and endorsing creative nonviolence, active nonviolence, that it will then affect the rest of society. But our focus is on the Catholic Church.
yeah, I think that's an important point to make too. This isn't like if Catholics would change, if the church would change, you'd hope the ripples would go out from there, but you kind of have to start there and worry about what the secular governments are going to do. It's a separate thing, don't you think?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I think sometimes that gets confused. So yeah, is there anything else that you feel like we should know about this movement, or is there any way that people could get involved or support you or learn more? I'll definitely post your link, Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. Is there anything else that you can tell us about or would like to share?
I guess I do want to just say that we do feel nonviolence is a positive, that it's I want to just find a quote to to read. Sorry.
No, that's great. Love to hear
that,
it. And there are so many good resources at the website too. I was looking that over before the interview. There's just a lot of good stuff on there. So I hope if you're listening to this, you'll at least go check it out, even if nonviolence isn't really your thing. It's all legit Catholic stuff, and it's good. There's a lot of good resources on there.
Thank you. Okay, nonviolence is not the negative refusal to do harm. Nonviolence is positive, a reverence for life anchored in the absolute innate dignity of every human person and all of creation. It is more than the absence of violence. It is the interjection of a transformative force into circumstances of violence. It is the power of love in action, the path to fuller truth, a spirituality, a distinct virtue, a way of life, an effective methodology for challenging all forms of direct, structural, and cultural violence, as well as for protecting all people and the earth. It is a set of tools, methods, and norms for preventing violence, for actively making peace, and for advancing post-conflict reconciliation, reconstruction, and sustainable peace. This more adequate and fuller understanding of nonviolence goes beyond pacifism, which is often understood merely as a rule against violence. And it challenges us to become better people and societies who engage in conflict. So I hope
that's beautiful. What was that from?
This is actually from, it's an internal document. We had a program from like mid 2017 to mid 2018. We had some roundtables we had 5 roundtables where we had a lot of theologians and some peace practitioners who met on a regular basis to wrestle with some of these issues. And so this is one of the papers that was created from one of the roundtables.
Oh, wow. That's great. Thank you for reading that. And I guess before we go, I'd like to say one thing, as long as I have your ear right now. I'm somebody who's been sort of looking into these issues for, I don't know, many years now. And I remember going to the Pax Christi conference. I think it was in Atlanta. It was a big one. I want to say it was a 40-year anniversary, like in 2015,
Uh-huh.
40th anniversary. Um, and I went to that, and I was walking around, and I had this feeling, and you can pass this on, Judy, to Pax Christi, and then you all can pass it on to the Pope too. That'd be great. Um, but I kind of got the feeling that I love Pax Christi and I love what you all are doing, but I'm just going to be honest. I felt like there was just so many like causes, like at the conference, there were so many things from tax resistance to anti-drones to human trafficking to the environment to economic injustice to minimum wage. I mean, it was kind of just this such a panoply of causes. And then I remember it was Bishop Gumbleton who got up and he was the keynote speaker. And he made this great speech. I don't know if it's online anywhere, but it was great. And he was encouraging Pax Christi and all people who care about peace in the Catholic Church to consider like coming back to the issue of like war and violence. Because I do worry that sometimes this issue gets like diluted when so many other things get like tacked onto it. Like even in the Nonviolence, a Style of Politics for Peace, Pope Francis mentions climate change and economic injustice and human trafficking, and I'm certainly concerned about all of those things. But I don't know. I'm wondering if like this group could maybe like really focus on like one issue, if it might be more likely to, I don't know, if succeed is the right word. But sometimes I feel like anytime you bring up war and peace issues, it's just kind of gets, I don't know, so many other things get mentioned that a lot of people care about war and peace, but when you throw in, say, climate change, they might not agree with that. So then you lose those people. Do you know what I'm saying?
I hear you. I do think that they are all linked, and I think probably we need to figure out a better way to clarify that and make it more digestible. I think that those links do exist, and that people who feel strongly about one or another do start linking them together. And yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, I understand what you're saying. Uh, we do feel that these issues are
Connected.
They're all pretty connected. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just a general observation. It seems to me like people who tend to be more on the left are really good at making those connections. But then it's like there are so many of them that it just becomes this big tangled web. And maybe that's the reality of the sinful world we live in. But sometimes I feel like the people on the right, like say with abortion, like it's just about abortion. Pro-life is pro-life, and there I can see criticism of that too. But by the same token, they don't let anything else sort of like get tacked onto that. It's like they don't allow you to like change the meaning of what pro-life is. And sometimes I think we do need to broaden our understanding of what pro-life means. But by the same token, I know they're very protective of that. And so I see it like as a strategy for raising consciousness and awareness, like sometimes keeping it to just that one issue. It can be helpful, but
I
it's
do
hard.
think
I can see both sides.
I would sorry to interrupt. I would just sort of jump in and I do I understand what you're saying. I think that I think there's room enough and all the work that has to be done for both. I think that there's some folks, the folks who pick their issue and just do laser focus on their issue, that's great. And then the folks who sort of more generalists and look at things wider, that's helpful too. For instance, I was just at an event on Thursday. There was celebration for it's the 10th anniversary of the Catholic Mobilizing Network Against the Death Penalty. And that is a group that has just done phenomenal work. It came out of the folks at the Bishops' Conference, years ago. They knew they needed to do more focused work on the death penalty, and the Catholic Mobilizing Network sort of grew out of that and became its own, own organization 10 years ago. And they're fabulous. And they have had one issue, and they've done excellent work, and they have seen successes in the last 10 years, and God bless them. I mean, that was very effective. But, we were so there were Pax Christi people there, and there are people who work on the environment who were there. Like, we're all in this together, and we need to keep supporting each other and talking to each other and standing up for each other and going to each other's parties and going
yeah.
and being there for each other and remembering each other as we're moving ahead.
That's great. Yeah, I love it. Well, thanks so much, Judy. So just real quick too, what's next for this group? Are you going to have another conference? You're just going to keep the website going for now? I guess as the leader of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, what are you doing on a day-to-day basis? What's your job?
Well, we are we've had a lot of success maintaining our conversation with the folks at the Vatican. That's been helpful. What we really need to do is get this conversation into the pews and get some resources created and really get the conversation going on at a local level, at a diocesan level. We are in the process at the moment of getting some committees set up for some people who are willing to roll up their sleeves and get that sort of work started. So that's the big job on the desk right now. And we're just keep moving forward.
Great. We'll keep plugging along. Thank you so much for taking the time today to explain this to me and anyone who might be listening to the podcast. Really appreciate your time and all of your efforts. Godspeed. I wish you guys the best, and I can't wait to see what happens next as a result of all your efforts.
Oh, thank you, Ellen. Thank you very much for the invitation, and best of luck to you too.
All right. Thanks. God bless.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, Judy.